demonstration of this, John.
Okay, yeah. I'll give it a minute or two.
We've got to get started. If do you mind just moving to the side and make space? Okay, if you can come through quickly, please, because we're a little late and we want to get started. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on such a wonderful Brussels evening. My name is John O'Brien. I'm the head of communications with MCC Brussels. Tonight, we're here to launch a new report, The Silent War on Farming. Never hungry again. That was the motto of the European agricultural policy after the devastations of the Second World War. Plentiful, secure, and affordable food was the goal of European agricultural policy. Although European farming has not been without issues, the policy has been broadly successful. Not only could the EU feed itself, but was able to support the needs of a growing population globally. Today, Europe's leaders have abandoned these goals. Instead, farming is subordinated to the increasingly radical demands of environmentalists. Farmers must now cut emissions, conserve nature, protect water and wildlife, and much more. Hundreds of farmers across the continent have been bankrupted by these policies, and thousands more imperiled. It seems as if the EU elites have forgotten who provides the food that they enjoy in Brussels restaurants. I was speaking to a reporter from the Netherlands about a year ago, and she told me about some horrible people. They poison the earth, they exploit the earth, they pollute the earth, they're not good for animals, and most of all, they're interested in profits at all costs. That is the way Europe's farmers are portrayed. They call it agribashing. We thought to begin tonight's discussion, we'd put farmers at the center of this conversation, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Daisy and Gunter Klaasen. They are poultry farmers from Flanders. And we're going to begin by hearing a little bit about what it's like to be a farmer in these times. Daisy and Gunter, if I could start with the both of you and asking, how did you get started in farming?
Actually, my husband is a farmer's son, so he's been in that life since he was born. For me, it's new. And about 8 years ago, when my father-in-law wanted to retire, we made a decision to take over the company of my parents-in-law.
Mm-hmm. Gunter, 5 generations, is that correct?
Yes, indeed. I'm the 5th generation at the location where we having our farm right now, because it's also important to know and to understand that you do not become a farmer. You actually are being born as a farmer. It's a hard way of life, but if you love it, it's also a beautiful way of life, and you do it with all the passion that you have to produce good and healthy food for everybody. But yeah, it's a really hard way of life, 7 by 7, 24 by 24, and yeah, that's why these days only the kids from farmers are willing to become a farmer, because it's not that easy to live that life.
Daisy, you were telling me that you made a big investment. This is not just a matter of just inheriting a farm from somebody. You actually made a big investment when you started out.
Yeah, first of all, we had to buy the company from the parents-in-law, and after a while, when we got used to farming, we made a decision to build new stables that were more equipped and also with less impact on nature. And to fulfill those investments, we had to get a big loan, which follows us around right now.
Yeah, I think it's only been 2 years ago that we made a decision to invest a lot, millions, really, a couple of millions in our farm, because we had to make a decision. Do we want to continue farming till we have the possibility to go on pension? And to do that, we had to build 2 new stables to have an income to produce enough chickens, enough food to be able to have an income of that farm. For that reason, we had to build 2 new stables with the newest installations, already with ammonium reducing systems. And only 2 years after we had that permission, they came with new rules, which would mean that some other stables who we already have been rebuilding with LED lights, with daylights for the chicken, with reducing power reducing ventilation. These stables, we are now, we should reduce 60% or with chickens or with techniques on that stables, and that's something that's almost impossible.
Because as opposed to what the journalist told me about farmers, you actually both think that the environment is very important, and you invested in the environment, and you got certificates to say that you were a green farm.
Yes, indeed. I think there is no farmer that will say that that nature or environment is not important. We need nature and we need environment. The environment and nature is the income from a farmer. Like these days now with a lot of rain, for a farmer this is not good also. You cannot go on the land. We need a good environment. So it's not right, it's not correct to blame farmers for the environment.
Daisy, I remember when I met you, you showed me certificates that you had got to say that you were a green farm.
Yeah, so when we got our new license, we were a green farm, which means that we have low impact on nature, even lower than before we built the 2 new stables. And now with the new rules they want to implement, we are not a green farm anymore. Mm-hmm. But we are not doing anything different than what we got permission for.
So what went wrong? Because you set out to invest in a farm, you borrow millions of euros, you completely redo the stables where the chickens are, you put in lights for the chickens, you make it the most, the best environment that can be possible, but suddenly something went wrong. What went wrong, Gunter?
Yeah, and that's when we come to the clue, I think. The nature restoration law and the creation of nature areas nearby farms is the reason that farms are, in our country, turning from a green farm to a red farm, which means from one moment on and in the other, your farm, like my farm at my location, for the 5th generation, always been at the same location. There was never a problem in the past, and now suddenly, because they are creating some nature areas nearby my farm, that will make it impossible for me to have a future.
What do you think? We ended up with a situation in which environmentalists seem to be very pitted against farmers, very much, why are we in this situation, do you think?
I think, especially in our area and in Flanders, is because of the nature organizations. They need the land of the farmers. Now we have a spread of a lot of small nature areas, but they are not connected to each other. Most of the times there is a farmer with some agricultural land between those nature organizations, and they have now been searching for some tools, and that's why they have invented these nitrogen crisis and nitrogen problem to make it impossible for farmers to produce or to use their land in the future. They are inventing rules that they will not be able to use manure in the future on their land. So that makes the land for a farmer useless. And that's the reason they invented these laws and these rules, just to make the land of the farmer useless for the farmer, so that the nature organizations are the only persons or people who are willing this land in the future, because it's useless for anything else.
So who sets the environmental standards? Who makes the standards for the environment?
The standards, by my belief, are being set by Europe, by the, like I said, the nature restoration law, and then it's up to the countries itself to make rules for the local countries to implement and to fulfill at the nature restoration law.
There was a time, though, when the environmental levels that you were dealing with, when you made your investment, when you started farming, when you just a couple of years ago took this loan, you were acceptable. The levels were acceptable.
Yes, indeed, and that's really the strange thing. Before we had the permit for build the new stables, so we had to make a study, a really expensive study. A study, only the study cost 30,000 euro, and then you don't even have the agreement to get the permit. And in that study, that's something about this big book, this big. All the nature areas in our neighborhood are listed in those study. The impact of my farm is already been studied, and it's been going to the government, who has been written or should have been written this study, and they give us the permission to build our farm like we have it right now. And 2 years later, they come with new rules, and we have to invest again few hundred thousands of euro. But that's impossible. Or reduce 60% of the chickens, but then we do not have an income anymore.
So what does the future look like, Daisy, from your point of view, with the change in the rules?
At this moment, it's really insecure for us. We just don't know if we are going to be able to continue the farm. And if we are not able to continue the farm, we still have the loan, so we go bankrupt. And we go bankrupt personally. It will follow us for the rest of our lives, and maybe also our children. So instead of giving our children a good future, yeah, we are destroying their future.
Okay.
For us,
By the government who is putting the rules otherwise than they did 2 years ago.
yeah, for us it was a dream to continue the work of our parents, of our family, and giving it through to our children, giving them a future. And instead, I'm afraid we're going to leave them with a lot of problems.
Okay, thank you very much, Daisy and Gunter. You'll have an opportunity to comment on this and to ask questions, because at MCC Brussels we really believe the audience should be very involved in the discussion. So please make a note of any questions or comments that you want to make at the end. We're going to now go, though, to Richard. Richard Schenk, Research Fellow at MCC Brussels, and he's the author of the MCC Brussels report, The Silent War on Farming. Richard, please share with us about the report.
Well, the report shows that the environmental burden that the European Union has put on our farmers has become over the years almost unbearable. And the first myth that we have to address is that farming is big business, because 90% of the farmers in Europe are actually families. They are family-run businesses, and they provide almost 9 million jobs, mostly in rural areas. And in other, one thing that some people are even a bit frowning upon, yeah, only 9 million. Well, these 9 million people need machines, they need fertilizers, they need chemical products, they build a lot of stables, equipment, housing. So actually the farming accounts in many member states for around 10-15% of the GDP. So these family-run businesses are at the very core of European economy, and we need to, and we can't imagine Europe without them, and because they are not only a source of stable income and of our food, but they are also their style of living, their identity is shaping Europe, and we need to keep them. So, and some ideas out there are not taking this into account, to put it mildly. The second thing that second myth that that my report addresses, that farmers are not doing enough. Well, during the first 3 decades of the European Union, we have had the situation that farms should amalgamate into bigger farms. They should specialize, they should invest in technology to have more output. But these were the first 3 decades of the European Union. Since then, we have had another 3 decades where Europe has cut the budget on its agricultural policy. So one permanent thing out there is that, well, these farmers, they receive so much money. Why are they protesting? Well, in 1990, agricultural policy accounted for 0.6% of the European Union's budget regarding to GDP. And in 2020, this fell down to 0.3%, a cut by 50%. And this money nowadays is not coming just for production itself. The so-called cross-conditionality, a bureaucratic term that's basically describing that money is only coming if you met certain environmental standards. Without it's unimaginable today that farmers receive any money. And this actually achieves something. In the Netherlands, farmers cut, for example, the nitrogen emissions by 60% during the last decades. So it's not that they are not doing nothing. And at the same time, output even slightly increased. So farmers are actually doing a lot to meet environmental goals. And this leads me to the fourth point, that food security can be met under these circumstances, because food security, well, if we are projecting the European climate goals into the future, then we met the net zero target for climate-related emissions in 2050. And to achieve these goals, simple investment into technology is not enough anymore. So many European policies actually now are targeting the reduction of agricultural policies. Many people will decline this fact, but in many cases this is the case. In the Netherlands and also in Flanders, we have achieved this point where current technology is not longer not longer enough to meet the emission targets, so production itself has to be cut. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. If we project this European policies into the future, this will be the case in basically all member states. So where is our food coming from? Well, we need food imports. And then we meet really something that's a conundrum, that why are we importing our food from abroad? Why do we need all these trade agreements with Australia, with Brazil, or further developing countries? I'm not against free trade, but the very reason behind these free trade agreements is that we need our food from coming somewhere, because we are not brave enough to bear the political cost of these emissions. If we want to have our food, then we should maybe produce it at home, where we have this agriculture that has already invested a lot into cutting emissions, instead of importing it from abroad. So we are only seeing that all these emissions are being pushed out of the EU. So on paper we're meeting our climate goals, but actually we are not doing much for the climate.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker, Fernand Keuleneer, is a special. Oh, sorry. Yes. Our final speaker is Fernand Keuleneer, a specialist in EU agricultural law. And if you could explain to us a little bit about what's going on with the laws that are being enacted, and what are they meant to achieve, and are they achieving it?
Sure. Thank you, John. When we are having the debates which we are having today, it's basically on the basis of a 1992 directive, the Habitat Directive, which was called Council Directive on the Conservation of Natural Habitats and of Wild Fauna and Flora. And the technique which was used there is being developed further now. What is the technique? This directive has annexes. The annexes to that directive lists habitats, natural habitats, and species, plants, animals. And in 1992, the idea was, okay, we are going to ask, to impose on the member states to designate special conservation areas. They have, each member state has to come back to the Commission with special conservation areas where you find a number of these habitats or species which have to be protected. And then basically the condition of those special conservation areas may not be deteriorated. They should not deteriorate. That was the idea. And so it happened. But you have to be aware of one thing if you are talking about about the EU. And that is that you can have political agreements. You can have texts which look like political agreements with lots of negotiations and lots of compromise. But never forget that these texts in the European Union are always also legal texts. And that's different from between the European Union and a member state. Depends on the system, the constitutional system of a member state. But in member states, you can have political agreements and there will be policies and so on and so forth. They do not necessarily create directly rights and obligations. But that's different in the European Union. Every political agreement is also enshrined in the law. So, what happened? You had this political agreement. There were policies on the level of the member states, the designation of these special protection zones, conservation zones, and then a number of regulations in order to meet the objectives here. But at the same time you have this political process, simultaneously, never forget, particularly now with the nature restoration law, simultaneously you have a judicial process. These texts create rights and obligations. So, people go to court. Groups go to court. Individuals go to court, but also groups go to court. And in environmental matters, you know about the Aarhus Treaty. Also, conservationist, environmentalist groups have standing in courts. So, parallel to the political system and to the political deliberations, parallel to the political system, you have the judicial system, and what happens in the judicial system. And actually what we are seeing happening now, nitrogen and so on and so forth, is mainly the result of judicial decisions, which vary from member state to member state. Don't forget, this was, 1992 was a directive. In theory, a directive is not directly applicable in the various member states. The various member states have to incorporate the directive into their own law and theoretically have a certain margin. So, some member states use these margins, and depending on the court system and the relations between executive branch and court system in the various member states, you get different results. But for instance, in the Netherlands and in Flanders, the northern region in Belgium, there have been court decisions which have taken a very strict point of view on the basis of certain interpretations of, one, the directive, and secondly, the national legal norms which have been implemented as a result of the directive. So what we are seeing now is a little bit less the result of political processes as it is the result of judicial processes. Now, the nature restoration law, that's the next big step. That is not going to, first of all, that is not going to be a directive. That is going to be a regulation, an EU regulation, which means that it is directly applicable in each of the member states. So the member states do not have to transpose the regulation anymore in their own legal system. The regulation is there, and it is part of European law, and it is immediately, directly applicable in each of the member states. So basically, there are two notes to be made. What we are seeing now is, even more than before, a Europeanization of environmental law, because it's going to be a directly applicable regulation, which is directly part of European law, and member states have to conform with European law. And secondly, if you read the text which came out of the trilogue deliberations, I mean, this is a paradise for lawyers. I mean, this is an absolute paradise for lawyers and for interest groups. I mean, which can use every single line in this regulation to wage wars. I don't want to exaggerate, but to wage wars in courts. So even much more than the directive of 1992, the nature restoration law will judicialize. And don't be fooled by, I mean, all these intricate deliberations and compromises which are so nicely reflected in the text. Because basically every compromise which is now in the text, and sometimes it's really very poorly worded, every single compromise is another opportunity for a fight on interpretation. Now, one last remark on my side. What is the main, as far as contents is concerned, what is the main difference between the pillar of 1992, the Habitat Directive, and the nature restoration law? That is what I would call the deterritorialization. The deterritorialization. Remember I said that, okay, there are these annexes to the directive of 1992, but still there is the territorial link because the member states had to designate special conservation areas. These special conservation areas will survive, of course, those who exist, but basically and the nature restoration law expands the scope of the 1992 directive, and the annexes of the nature restoration law are even thicker. But what has disappeared are the specific territorial protection zones. So basically, what we now see happening for farmers near the special conservation areas, the 1992-1994 special conservation areas, can happen under the nature restoration law anywhere on the territory of the European Union.
Yep.
Special conservation area or not. I mean, there is the requirement in the regulation that by 2030, 30% of the whole land, and I don't know how that is going to be distributed over the European Union, but 30% of land and 30% of sea, European Union has to have a protection status. But I mean, there are no territorially based zones.
Okay.
So basically it creates an enormous uncertainty, which will have to be fought out in courts for not only farmers but also industry, but basically for all human activity.
What a mess.
No.
Yes, it's a simple mess. Daisy and Gunter, just to come back to you, if I understand it correctly, the environmental standards are informed by environmental groups who then go to politicians who then enact the requirements. What happens when farmers cannot no longer meet those environmental standards? What happens to the land?
With our lands, it's depending on how many debts the farmers are. Like my wife already said, most of the times farmers have their debt on personal name. So if they go bankrupt, they have to sell their land. And yeah, if it's depending on who is going to buy the land, but yeah, most of the times it won't be able to have their land in the future.
Mm-hmm. And where does that land go to? Does that land go to become a conservation land then?
That's depending on who's going to buy the land. If it's possible for a farmer to buy that land, because that's with the laws that are coming right now, mm-hmm. It won't be able to. It won't always be able for a farmer to even buy the land of a colleague, but if it's possible for a farmer, he maybe can buy the land if he is in the ability to pay enough for that land, because that's also something that's going on. Nature organizations are having subsidies up to 80% in Flanders to buy land.
So the environmental organizations who set the standards and inform the politicians, they then can buy the land with an 80% subsidy. It's a bit like the fox guarding the hen house, yeah?
Yeah, indeed. It's actually, like I believe, something illegal, but it is the truth. Nature organizations in Flanders have been given subsidies up to 80% to buy land, while no person, no company, no farmer ever has received money to buy land.
Mm-hmm. Daisy?
And afterwards, when they get the land, to retain the land, they again get some money.
The environmental groups get money to develop the land in a conservation way.
Yeah.
Seems like a good business. Richard, if I can just come to you, can you explain to us a little bit about the environmental, the emissions certificates?
Well, even many EU politicians realized that this is not going to work, so they invented a new business for the farmers. This is called the emission trading scheme. So basically every farm should be allocated an amount of emissions, CO2, nitrogen, whatever, that they can emit, and then if they need more, then they need to buy more certificates. If they emit less, then they can sell their own certificates. And but the key, so that this leads to a reduction of climate emissions, climate-related emissions, is that over the time, all the amount of emissions should go down in Europe. So first, it's going to be a lot of certificates. In the end, there should be basically very few left. And they want to expand this scheme that's already in some industrial sectors in place into agriculture as well. So, for example, if you cut your emissions, you have half of your chicken, then you can sell your certificates to the industry. If a forest farmer is not cutting his trees, he's basically capturing CO2, so he can acquire more certificates and sell it on the market.
So it's paying people not to farm.
Yeah, it's basically paying people not to farm, and also this is they present it as a long-term solution to the loss of income to the farmers. But if you reduce the amount of certificates that are being issued, then of course this is going to be on long term again not that much of a business. And this is but this is presented as a new business opportunity for farmers. And I think many farmers in Europe are also not traders of certificates. They like to grow their own products. So the identity issue that this is a certain style of living and that farming forms the core of rural communities is basically not issued at all through this emission trading scheme.
I imagine, Gunter, you're not keen to become a trader in emission certificates.
No, but I would like to add something about this. In Flanders, they recently they made a nitrogen agreement. In that agreement, farmers they must reduce their nitrogen emissions by 20% 40, 60%, depending on what kind of animals they are having. But in this reduction is just giving for free for the moment to the industry, because for example, the farm that we have to reduce 60% in our older stables, while we in total on a yearly base not even 3 ton on nitrogen calculated would produce on emissions, while an industrial company in Antwerp, I will not mention the name, but they produce the same amount, the same kind of nitrogen, also ammonium, by 18 ton. And they are doing everything to give them a permission, while we, with a production of 3 ton, have to do a reduction of 60%. That's something that I do not understand. Then it's not about nitrogen, it's just reducing, or the farmers have to reduce so that the industry can grow.
Fernand, you wanted to get in very briefly because I want to come out to the audience. Microphone? Yeah. Microphone? You'll need a microphone. Oh, sorry.
No, there are a couple of points. It is absolutely true what Gunter and Daisy said, that if farmers have to stop, family businesses have to stop, part of the land will go to environmentalist groups. But another possibility is, and I would not neglect that, that we may see that part of this land go to really big agro. Goes to big agro. And now we hear more and more, okay, now all these measures have to be taken prior to 2030, but then as of 2030, there will be new policies, more reasonable policies, some even say. So, if now basically the farmers have to do that effort, which in quite a few cases is impossible, the reduction, as you said, of 60%, 50%, I mean, that's not something very easy. And then still, okay, those are the generic efforts, and then you still have the problem of the proximity to special conservation. But okay, all of this has to be done prior to 2030, and then maybe after 2030 there will be a relaxation of policies. Who knows? Or the other way around. Or the other way around. It's uncertain. It's uncertain. But if someone wanted to create really opportunities for big agro, I mean, that's exactly what they would do. So, yes, part of this land will go to environmentalist groups, and they are very eager to get this land. But I see in part also another possible scenario. So that was one.
Thank you. Let's take it out to the audience. If you could raise your hand, please, and just wait for a moment until the microphone gets to you, because we want to make sure that you're heard. I'm going to take this gentleman over here in the green jacket first.
Good evening. My name's Stuart Agnew. I'm a former MEP here from the UK. I'm a retired farmer from the east of England. I used to produce free-range eggs. My neighbour farms broilers on a large scale, and he has put in a system where he can burn his manure. It takes gas, yes, to get the heat going, but once he's got the manure burning, piling on more manure keeps the fire going. That heat heats all his broiler sheds in the winter. That means that he doesn't have to export any manure. He's not polluting the land at all. I understand that in the wintertime, in the summertime, he has an AD plant that converts the manure into electricity, which then cools the buildings. Now, this ticks all the boxes. Is such technology available in the Netherlands, or is it simply such a high capital cost that you simply can't do it? Would that not be a very good system to attract grants?
Okay.
So I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Thank you. We're going to take a couple of questions and then we'll come back. So if you remember that, Gunter. Yes, this gentleman here in the blue jacket.
Well, hello, I'm Chowagadush, and my question would go to Daisy and Gunter. So you told that your certificate's going to expire. When it's going to expire, and what are you going to do if it expires and you cannot renew it? And I would follow on. What I guess there are other farmers in the same situation. So have you ever considered joining teams? And what about putting pressure on the Flanders government? I'll leave it for that. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. I'm going to take the lady behind with the white scarf.
Yes, I wanted to know, why is nitrogen a problem? It sounds like an invented, fabricated nonsense. What are we talking about, and why do we need to address it?
Okay. I'm going to, with Gunter and Daisy, would you like to take some of those questions?
Okay, first of all, the first question, a really good question, because now they're talking about a nitrogen problem, but actually nitrogen can be a solution. Nitrogen from agriculture actually isn't even a problem. Our manure, also the same situation, because we are too small, it's not efficient and not, for us, economic interesting to burn it at our location, but our manure is also being transported to a large other factory that also burns the manure and creates electricity of it. So because of the electrification of also traffic, electricity will be an important thing. So the manure is an energy source, and we only have to use it the right way. There are different techniques to create electricity or heat out of manure. So that's something that we have to invest in to develop it on a larger scale, I think. The second question was about?
Yeah, the expiring of the license, but actually our license doesn't have an end date.
But that's a tricky question. In Flanders we have an environmental license, like they say, but they can put additional requirements on a license every 6 years. So they do not put an end date on the license, but if you do not fulfill to the new regulations, after 6 years they can eliminate your license. So you are never certain. You have to follow the new regulations all the time.
And how about the nitrogen crisis that the lady referred to?
Indeed. In fact, there is no such thing as a nitrogen problem. It's not possible to find any plant that will die from nitrogen. The only thing that can happen is that one plant likes nitrogen more than the other and will grow faster, and in that way make it harder for the weaker, the more sensitive plants to grow. And that's the only thing that nitrogen does. Nitrogen, in fact, the ammonium. Oh, you have different kind of nitrogen. You have ammonium. From most of the ammonium comes from cows or from animals in general. But then you also have nitrogen oxides, and that exists when you burn fuel or gas, and that's a different kind of nitrogen. But the nitrogen from animals is the only effect that it has is it
makes plants grow.
Yeah, and the nitrogen oxides also have a negative benefit, negative effect on human health.
Daisy, I want to address the question the young man asked. He was asking, have you joined together with other farmers in Flanders? And how about joining together with farmers to put pressure on politicians to answer some of these questions that we're dealing with?
That's something that we have been trying to do since the first agreement from the government. We have several groups. One of them is also over here. And we are trying to fight it with different farmers, trying to fight this We do everything we can to
fight for our rights. But they know, as a farmer, it's not always possible to leave your farm. For us also, if my dad wasn't able to now watch over my chickens, it wouldn't be able for me to be here. So it's not always possible to go on the streets, but we try to combine our forces to contact the politicians and go on the streets as much as we can. But it's very hard and to make them understand and make them listen to us. They want to talk to us, but they never listen.
Other questions? Yes, here and here.
Thank you very much. I grew up in a rural area in my home country, and when I went to the urban areas, it was really fascinating to see that the closest relation people had with animals is basically seeing the chicken breast and the poster of the chicken, and that was basically it. But you said that you've been in the business for quite a long time, and my question revolves around the idea of how people develop this tendency that, yes, we are becoming greener and greener to the point where we say we stop eating anything that we ate before for the sake of getting into a new utopia or a green vision that we all want to achieve in the future. So it's pretty much a private question. I don't want to dive that deep into your private life, but when you talk to your friends in the past, let's say in the last 10 or 12 years, did you see this pattern that first people advocated for some, let's say, emission reduction or even not that complicated concepts to the point of basically stopping you from doing your job?
Okay, thank you.
So I was just talking to Daisy and Gunter before the event, and I was quite surprised to find out that the Ukrainian agricultural imports or dumping is also affecting them, just like it does us in Hungary, Poland, and Eastern Europe. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay. And over here.
Thank you. I have a question whether I see that the point of the government and the point of the farmers is really far away currently. And I want to ask whether you see some kind of a meeting point where you can make an agreement that you can rejoin together with the government to make farming back in its path that it was used to be. Do you see some kind of a thing that you can work together to find a solution, and to continue?
Okay, yes, Fernand.
Don't forget what I said. It's not only an agreement between the farmers and the government. What is the argument of the government? Partly, to a large extent, they could do more. But the government says, frankly, we are sympathetic to you, but there is nothing we can do. The courts, the courts annul permits because of the Habitat Directive 92 and all the regulations which flow from there. That's the main argument of the government now. There's nothing we can do, sorry, courts. It's not entirely right. It's not right. But it's not entirely false either. And if we go ahead with the nature restoration law, it will be even much more like that. So yes, pressure on the government, but if tomorrow there is a deal with the government which the European Court of Justice doesn't like, it doesn't serve any purpose.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on the Ukrainian grain? Yes, Richard?
Yeah, the Ukrainian grain issue is connected to this whole how should we open up the European agriculture policy issue connected. If we allow a new member state, especially Ukraine, which is one of the biggest agricultural producers in the entire world, to come into the common market, this will immediately have effects. The Ukraine has a very extensive agriculture. It produces a lot of mass products that are often of lower qualities, which is why the Ukrainian agriculture is so important for the developing world. And if this kind of, for example, the grain imports are coming to us, the other grain producers in Europe will not will have a hard time, and this is exactly what the common market actually is about. We have had a specialization between the member states over the last decades, which was a good thing. So this is why we have so much livestock farming in Flanders and the Netherlands. This is why we have Finnish wood available in the whole Europe. This is a good thing. But if you allow new member state in, that's going to have a lot of effects on the producers. And why is Ukraine producing so low? Because for the so low prices, because they don't have to meet the same environmental and other standards than European producers have to. This also applies to, for example, South American producers. Just think of the new free trade agreement with South America, with Mercosur. This would apply to other producers in the world as well. And if we would make them make the same requirements that European farmers have within the free trade agreements to export their fruit to Europe, then they would become basically as expensive as European farmers would be. So we wouldn't have any effect. So the assumption that we will import a lot of agriculture products which are of lower quality, with lesser environmental standards, is not far away.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go to over here, to this gentleman here.
Well, thank you. I have a question about geopolitics. Is this part of a larger movement also outside of the EU, across the West? Do we see this similar kind of war on small farmers outside of the EU, or is this a uniquely European question?
Thank you. I'm going to go at the back, Frank Frady.
Yes, very interesting discussion. I'm a little bit cynical. So when you make a distinction between government and courts, or between politics and the judiciary, I think one of the way that I look at it is that in Europe, governments tend to outsource decision-making to two institutions. One is the courts, and the other one is the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. So basically they say, none of this is our fault. It's not us, it's the judges, or it's the NGOs who are responsible for this. And this institutionalization of outsourcing decision-making is a way of them avoiding responsibility for making unpopular decisions. And I think it's interesting, by the way, that there are very few political parties in Belgium and many parts of Europe who actually take the sides of the small farmer, that actually stand up for them. They seem to be quite, for them it's quite irrelevant. So it seems to me that there's a problem here, which is that unless we take on the courts and not give them the respect that a lot of people do, but actually to make it very, very clear that the courts are playing a political game, it's very difficult to win. And the same thing with the NGOs. Unless we make it very clear that the NGOs are actually in the pay of organizations and interests that are hostile to the way of life of small farmers, unless we do that, again, it's very difficult to do very much. But there's another point. You see, in America, in the United States, this has happened already, where environmentalists, hand in hand with the government, have gone into many parts of the Midwest of the United States to get rid of small farming on the basis that it's environmentally a problem. And the minute they kick off the small farmers off the land, what happens is that the environmental groups get the land, same thing as in Europe, and the day after, it somehow ends up in the hands of agribusiness, or ends up in the hands of some kind of big industrial company. So there is really a racket going on here, whereby at the expense of small farming, you have all these business interests who are complicit with the political institutions in making small farmers pay the price for their greed. So the really greedy people are not the farmers, but all these other institutions who are trying to manipulate their way of life. And I think we have to understand this, because if we don't, then we're going to be fighting the wrong enemy. We're not going to understand that there are some very strong interests here that we need to take on.
Okay. I'd like to take this gentleman down at the back on the right-hand side first.
John Webber, Flemish Club. I'm working here quite long. Frank, I totally agree with you, of course. But looking in the perspective, this summer there was a meeting in Germany where it was talked about the trade-off of CO2 and nitrogen, and it came out that it was wrong, that it was not working, and that we will stop doing that. No one was talking about it here in Brussels, because we were saying like, oh, there are some farmers making forest and Urwald somewhere in Africa, and that's okay. A Swiss company who was doing that trading for the rest of the world was actually called out that it was not working like that. So we are slowly stopping this trading of nitrogen and everything else. In the Netherlands, just 3 days ago, the government, the minister was saying, oh, we made a mistake in the model. So the party that was in favor of the small farmers was the BBB, who was calling that out the whole time since that they started. So the BBB was saying, look, this modeling as it is used is wrong. They did go to court, and finally the Minister of Agriculture was saying, oh yes, we made a mistake. Oops, sorry. So on a global level, in Germany, it was said we have to stop it. We are no longer going for that. No one was talking about it in the EU regulations here. On a local, national level, the NGOs were sued and lost the case because they couldn't prevail any numbers. As the lady was saying, where are we talking about? We cannot get that so-called ideology of there is a natural problem actually in the figures. So companies are sued for that. Mm-hmm. So what I want to know from the trilogy, as we are talking here on the right side, my question here is the following. If that is coming true, as it was talked about just a few days ago about the pre-presidency talk about Belgium is coming the president of Europe next year, and they were talking about, oh, we have to leave this, and Mrs. de Meer of Flanders is still pushing something through what is no longer internationally wanted. So what are we going to do as farmers calling out the emperor that we were losing a lot of money, a lot of our opportunities by following the wrong decision making?
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with this gentleman here at the front. Yeah.
So we can, of course, criticize these policies, and we can see that these are not the right solutions. However, there is climate change, and there are problems right now even. We can sense that the temperatures are getting warmer, but what would be your solutions to this problem? So how could you decrease emissions, and how could you solve it by still being fair to the farmers?
Okay, we're going to take that in a minute. If you could just make a note of that, because I just want to go to this gentleman here. Yes.
What is the solution and what is the problem? I think that the two things go together, because I see the problem is the European Union as such, and the solution is to get rid of the European Union as it is today. There's no other solution. We have to think that the European Union is a supranational setup where lobbyists, big corporations, multinationals, and outside Europe governments decide what to do and how to do it.
Okay.
The citizens have nothing to say. And with these directives, regulations, etc., the citizen do not have a say at all.
Thank you. Over here, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think the model's not working, is it? I mean, when Gunter was growing up with his father learning how to be a farmer, he wasn't expecting to be learning how to fill in forms. And once he finishes one set of paperwork for one directive, the goalpost will move, as we've heard, and he'll be starting paperwork for a different set of targets. And the only people who really benefit from this are the consultants and lawyers, as we've heard. And the European Union doesn't produce chickens, it produces reports, and it likes people who are like them, who produce reports, who are professional report writers. And the NGOs have turned into professional report writers. The judges are trained to be professional report writers. And the one thing that strikes me is it doesn't just hit farmers. There's no occupation in Europe now that's not employing consultants to write reports. I talk to people who work in hospitals, who are doctors, who've trained for many years to save people's lives, and they're having to write an application for funding for a spectrometer in their department. And I'm thinking, why aren't you doing what you trained to do, which is medicine? Why are you and you're working with consultants to fill in forms? And I think, that's one of the issues that needs addressing in all this as well.
Thank you. We're going to come back to the panel. Gunter, would you like to address any of those questions? I'm particularly interested in the one from the young man who's saying that, there is a climate problem.
Yeah,
so
I'll try to answer as lot of questions as I can still remember. First of all, for the moment, we in our area, Flanders, the Netherlands, are on top of the world in producing food with the less impact on the environment. If we have to move, have to quit, this production is going to be taken over by other countries with no tools, no knowledge about animal welfare, but also ammonium reduction, things we already use in our countries. So by eliminating us, the climate is doesn't gonna have any benefit on it. In the opposite, it will be worse for the climate. Everything that we produce on the most efficient way isn't gonna be produced in another country, because if we produce too much, the prices are gonna collapse. And then nobody's going to produce it in the future. So that there is a balance in the market what we produce worldwide. So if we quit producing stuff on the most efficient way, other countries like, for example, China, are going to produce it without any restrictions on climate.
Thank you.
Impact. Another question.
This one from, is it a problem only in Europe or also
geopolitical
outside?
problem?
The nitrogen problem, like I believe, but I think Fernand has a better view of that, is most important in Holland and in Flanders, because of that nature areas nearby. Is growing in Europe, but we follow it in Flanders because we have our farm in Flanders. The other question.
Fernand?
Or maybe to...
There were a lot of questions after each other. I couldn't remember everything. I have nothing to write down.
And the paperwork, I think Bill's comment about the paperwork, you were talking about that at one point, Daisy, yeah?
Yes, so the paperwork gets more and more and more every year. So every new rule makes it that we have to do more paperwork. So at some moments, the paperwork is more important than how we handle the chickens.
Mm-hmm.
I remember another question from behind about the tool, and indeed the fact that the numbers that are now used to calculate the impact on the environment are not correct. There are different kind of deposition. You have wet deposition of nitrogen and dry deposition. And it's very hard to measure the dry deposition. So now they have implemented a tool in Holland and the Netherlands and in Flanders based on the same program, but that program is not correct. There is a 70% margin on the outcome of the program. So yeah, it's not something that you can use to make to give a farm or a company a permit if you are not even certain about the outcome of a tool. The tool is just giving what you put in the tool,
okay.
But they don't have any right measurements because they are not available.
Okay, Fernand?
Well, yes, I want to elaborate a little bit on that, and actually also the question in the back. Well, first of all, there are no measurements, there are only models.
Yeah.
Nothing is measured. No deposition is measured. Parenthesis, make the distinction between emission and deposition. Emission is what you emit. Deposition is what comes down to the ground in a special conservation zone.
And they have concentration.
Yeah. So, but there are only models. There is no measurement. That's number one. Number two, another problem with this model is that, okay, if the level of nitrogen in a special conservation area reaches the critical level, the kritische depositiewaarde, the critical level, well, who is responsible? Now basically the farm, which is close to the special protection area, is held responsible. If the farm wants to get a new permit, particularly if it wants to expand, it will not get the permit if it has the slightest impact on the special protection zone. But maybe the farm was, and agriculture was not responsible at all for reaching the critical deposition value. Maybe that was traffic. Maybe where you live, that was the airport of Antwerp, or the airport of Eindhoven, or industry, the port of Antwerp. So basically, that's unknown.
So you don't know where the emissions come from. You
Well,
can't prove.
The emissions, yes, but the depositions, not.
Okay.
And even in the model, as was rightly said by Gunter, even in the model, it is recognized that with respect to this, what is called a background deposition, there is an uncertainty of 70%. So we don't basically know anything about who is responsible for reaching the critical deposition level. Then it's not particularly intelligent and certainly not fair to make agriculture responsible. But what is the political thinking behind this? The political thinking behind this is, okay, we need new industry. And particularly in Flanders, we need new chemical investments in the port of Antwerp. Now that's a big problem because the port of Antwerp is very close also to a number of special protection zones, not only in Belgium but also in the Netherlands. So basically we have to empty the nitrogen bath. That's the expression which is used. In order to create new space, new nitrogen space for new investments. But who has to empty the nitrogen bath? Not the industry. Not the industry, because industry does not have to take generic measures. They are not obliged to reduce by 2030 their emissions by 50%. So who has to empty the nitrogen bath? Those who are perhaps not even responsible for filling it up.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back out to the audience again, and I'd particularly like to talk to you. You are the person who usually don't speak at a meeting, don't say anything, don't ask a question. I'd like you to consider asking a question or making a comment about what you're seeing here tonight. So please raise your hand if you hadn't usually spoken at a meeting before. I would like to come here, though, to the next person who's going to speak. Yep, thank you.
Mick Hume, I write for the European Conservative here in Brussels. Very, very interesting discussion, and I think a quick observation following, which will lead to a question. The EU's war on farming, which I don't think is an exaggeration, and war is a very dramatic word, but I think it's justified, is to me one of the most powerful illustrations of the kind of two Europe problems. Where you have the one Europe based here in Brussels, where the EU commissioners have lunch with their friends from the green NGOs and go home to their partners who are lawyers and judges and all decide amongst themselves that it's a wonderful thing that they're doing in trying to reduce emissions in farming. And then you have the real Europe, where the struggling farmers live and work, and where people are faced with rising food prices, etc., etc. And that gap, I think, is so graphically illustrated by this issue. And it seems to me what we're dealing with here is a huge act of political betrayal. Because what Richard's report shows really well is that in the first decades of European agricultural policy, farmers like Daisy and Gunter were told, invest in all the new technologies, do everything you can to raise productivity. We're going to feed Europe, we're going to feed the world, we're never going to be hungry again. And it was a fantastic success story. The Netherlands, I think, by some standards, is the second biggest exporter of agricultural goods in the world after the United States. The Netherlands is the second biggest exporter of agricultural product in the world after the United States. It's an amazing success story. And now they're told, everything we've told you to do for the last 30 years, stop doing it, and if you carry on doing it, we're going to close your farms. That's an incredible act of political betrayal. So my question is, what do we think the political consequences of that are going to be? Because we've talked about the fact that they've got the power, they've got the judges, they've got the commission, they've got the NGOs, they've got the money. The one thing we have got is democracy. And we've seen, as Richard's report also indicates, the beginnings of democratic pushback against this. We've seen the Farmers' Party win the Senate elections in the Netherlands. We've seen the populists win or come first in the general election in the Netherlands, which of course is to do with migration, but it's also to do with the reaction against the green policies of the EU. So we've got the European parliamentary elections coming up. What are the consequences of this going to be? And is it possible we're going to see a proper populist pushback against these policies from Brussels?
Thank you. We'll take that question in the panel in a minute. This gentleman at the front, please.
I would like to have an individual question to Gunter. You mentioned that you are the 5th generation of farmers of your land. Could you imagine a future where, because of the sanctions, you're gonna have to lose your land? If so, can you avoid that anyway? And also, are there other farmers? Are the other farmers face the same problem as you, or you are an individual in that regard? Thank you very much.
Thank you. At the back.
Yes, well, reflecting on one of the ways in which the pushback begins to come, and where I think slightly disagree with my colleague Richard on the fact about the fact that are the imports of food that we eat, if they close the farms in Europe, going to actually come from abroad? Because people in the EU, as this edition of EU Observer ably demonstrates, are already planning what comes after they close the agriculture farms, which is all kinds of artificial, or as they call them, alternative meat products. So the fact is that, and this is where it's going to really hit the road for people, because they're not just going to destroy the rural world as we know it across Europe, but they're also then going to come effectively into your dining room and tell you that you can't eat the products you like to eat. And I think that is really going to have an impact on people and how they understand these policies.
Thank you. Anyone else comment? Okay, I'm going to come back to the panel. So, democratic pushback. We saw the election in the Netherlands. Is it democratic pushback possible? Is it coming?
I think it is possible, but it will be very difficult. All the people, all the civilians have to understand the need and the importance of being able to afford healthy food. And they have to realize where the food is coming from. Once they are doing that, a pushback is possible. But for the moment, people are just going to the grocery store or to the shop and they find everything without realizing where it's coming from. But it's only 1% of the people who are producing the food of 99% of the population. Mm-hmm. So with elections, yeah, if it's just coming from the farmers, it will be very difficult. That's why we need to reach all the peoples, all the civilians, to understand, to come up and to support the farmers, because you need the farmers for your food 3 times a day.
So what you're saying, Gunter, is that people watching this live stream and watching the recording of this program later on, that it's not just a fight for farmers, it's a fight that everybody should be taking up for farming and for food.
Yes, indeed. People, yeah, like I just mentioned, they really have to start thinking about where everything is coming from. We are having the most reliable food production in the world. The most safe food production. Start to appreciate this and start supporting the farmers who are doing this with all their heart, producing the food for you.
Okay. Daisy, one of the audience members asked the question, you know, there's a danger that you're going to lose your land. Is this something that other farmers are facing in Flanders? Is the crisis in farming something that other European farmers are experiencing at the moment?
I think every farmer is uncertain at this time. So if the EU or Flanders and Netherlands are going through with the rules they want to set up, no farmer is going to be sure anymore about their future.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I can add at this, actually there is really a war going on against farmers, especially in our area where we live. You see the shirts over there. We live in the Turnhouts Vennengebied. They are attacking us at very different ways, not only with nitrogen. They are searching for water use restrictions. They are they want to create national parks, everything to make agriculture impossible in our area. So there is actually a war going on against farmers in our area.
Thank you. Richard, your report does not just look at farming in Flanders. Your report looks at many things in Europe that are happening with farming. So is this a dreadful situation that many farmers are facing?
Well, as Fernand pointed out quite cleverly in the beginning, the situation that Daisy and Gunter are facing are the consequence of 30-year-old regulations that have been sued by environmental NGOs and made by some stupid political decisions into a state where that are almost unbearable right now, and there's much more European legislation on the way, and the Habitat Directive that's causing this situation actually has a so-called deterioration prohibition, which means that it has to be stricter with every 7-year cycle. This is why you have a 6-year license, because every 7 years it needs to be a bit more harsh. The upcoming regulations, like the nature restoration law, you pointed it out, are going to be even more open for these policies. So what we see in the Netherlands and Flanders are actually more like the scouts, like the vanguard of bigger European agriculture policy issues that are going to pop up basically in every member state. One of the things that in Finland is the forestry that's affected. In Italy, the kiwi farmers are struggling. And we can go basically to every member state where some farming sector is affected. livestock farming was one of the first targets that they had in the Netherlands, because many of the climate-related emissions are coming from animals. And to expand the scope to the global stage, somebody asked, are the other countries in the world doing the same? No. Can somebody imagine an Indian government, the biggest country on earth, where the government is already struggling to feed the people, where an agricultural policy includes cutting back production? I think this would lead to a human catastrophe that we can't imagine nowadays in Europe. So actually, when the European leaders went out into the global stage and tried to export their ideas, they, in a diplomatic fashion, they were said no thanks. Sometimes not even very in diplomatic fashion. And to connect this with another with this EU bubble, is this an EU bubble policy, and that is meeting harsh realities out there? Certainly yes, not only on the global stage, but also out in the member states, in the European member states. And I want to come back to the question through this: what should we do about climate change? First, European agriculture is highly diverse. We see we have a very different geography, very different agricultural structures, very different societies out there in Europe, and this is actually a case where we should not have European decision making, but it should be decided on a national state level, because these people know how to deal with the environment. The Dutch have been cultivating these lands for thousands of years. The Finnish have been cultivating it for thousands of years. If somebody knows what to do about climate change, it's the people who are closest to the decision making. And this also opens up the possibility to see some very good examples how to deal with climate change. If we have the same policy all across Europe, there is no room for experimentation. There is no room for innovation anymore, how to deal with climate change, how to cut back emissions. And not also to how to cut back emissions. We are not having a debate about how to mitigate the effects of climate change. Because what we have right now is only cut back emissions. But if you talk about how to deal with the effects of climate emissions, we don't have an honest debate right now in Europe, because everybody is in this climate panic about cutting back emissions.
Thank you. Appropriately, Richard gets the last word at this meeting as the author of this report. I'd ask you to take up the challenge that Gunter and Daisy have given us all. This is not just a fight for farmers. It's a fight for food. It's a fight for food security. It's a fight that does not mean that we have to be enemies of the environment at all. It means that we need sensible policies, and we need our politicians to understand that. So for us, I think the call is on us to actually do something. I know that MCC Brussels, this is not just a one-off meeting for us. We have a commitment to farming. We have a commitment to farming families in Europe, and we plan to continue this work. I'd ask you to read the report. I'd ask you to share the report. I'd ask you to talk to your political representatives about this report and share it with them. I'd like you to, first of all, give a round of applause to our panelists tonight. Thank you very much. And I would like those of us who are here to join us for a glass of wine afterwards, and to continue the conversation and continue to engage with the panelists and with one another about what we can do about farming. But before we go, I'd just like to show you a small video that we made, a video that's on our YouTube channel. You can see this video, you can share this video, and we'd ask you to spread it and spread the word about farming. Thank you.
We are just trying to follow the rules to do everything right. It's a family business. It's not an industry, it's a family business. It's a couple with the children. And it's the same over here. So all our debts are also the debts of the children if we cannot continue producing. I'm Daisy. I am 45 years old. I was born in Giel, another city than here. And now we are farming, so I'm a farmer.
My name is Gunter Klaasen, fifth generation farmer at this location. We have, like I believe, a beautiful chicken farm in Ravels. A few years ago, I believe it was.
We are doing this 8 years now.
8 years.
But then the last license we got was in 2020. And then 2 years later, the government starting changing the rules. Before we had how they call a green farm, so we have a good impact on nature. And now suddenly we are, if you see the figures, we would be a red farm. So actually we wouldn't be able to stay over here working like we are working now. So they give us a license 2 years before. We do all the investments, following all the rules they put in themselves, and then they go change their own rules. So we have, actually we have to quit, and then it's done for us.
This is something that's really ridiculous.
I think farming is very much under attack. It's a silent, very silent war against farming, and it's being conducted in order to promote a green agenda, which is seen as a value in and of itself. So the people who believe that the environment has acquired this sacred status assume that farmers and the rural communities are their enemy. Why are they their enemy? Because farmers and the rural communities are principally concerned with preserving the countryside in their own way of life, and because farmers are also concerned with growing food. And from their standpoint, the growing of food is seen as a second-order principle compared to the importance of saving the environment.
We have to reduce that nitrogen from that stables with 60%. 60%, and in the new license there was no problem to have the chickens at these conditions. We had a business plan calculated on this amount of chickens for that fitting in the stables, and now they say we had to reduce otherwise the chickens with 60% in that stables, which would mean that I go bankrupt. So for me the situation is killing me and my family. There's also something going on in Flanders about the impact on nature. They invented something like the impact score tool. It's a tool that calculates the impact of a farm or also industrial company on the habitat or Nature 2000 areas in the neighborhood. A few years ago, also before we had our license, we were a green company, and green did mean that I didn't have an impact of more than 5%. We had an impact about 3% on the environment following the tool. Now the rules are suddenly changed. They put the level of impact for agriculture farms to 0.025 with a variable value of 0.028. Everything above this value will not be able to continue in the future. That means for us that if we have to have a new license for one reason or another, it won't be able to have a new license. Here is no future at this place.
In that case, our farm will go bankrupt. We won't be able to keep chickens, so we don't get an income. We can't pay off our loans, so we go bankrupt. And we go personally bankrupt. It's not just the company, it's us as a family personally.
So farming is completely dependent on European decision making. If the current policies continue, as they are being proposed today. Farming, actually, it is the target of many European policies to reduce farming output, especially when it comes down to livestock or when it comes down to climate policy issues.
They invented actually the nitrogen crisis or nitrogen problem because in fact the nitrogen level is not that low that there is a problem, especially not the ammonium level. The ammonium level is below the European standards, but they created this ammonium and nitrogen problem just to make it possible for nature organizations to remove the agriculture and get the land to create more nature. And that's the only reason they invented this nitrogen problem, because when they created the Nature 2000 areas in Europe 30 years ago, there was a lot of more nitrogen in the air than today. 55% more nitrogen was in the air when they pointed the habitat areas in Europe, and today, with 55% less nitrogen, they say there is a problem. That's something crazy.
Farming isn't just simply about growing food. Farming isn't just a business. Farming is a way of life. And we think that that way of life is an essential ingredient to what it means to be European. If you lose that, if that community becomes isolated and marginalized, then Europe itself and the European way of life will diminish in terms of its importance. So it is for that reason that we stand up for the farmers and we stand up for the rural communities, and we'll do our utmost to ensure that we can prevent the green agenda from triumphing over the farming way of life. I think ordinary citizens can do a lot to make sure that farming and the farming way of life is preserved.
That's weighing most on us. Just we want to give them a future, but with the rules changing of the government, we are giving them a bad future.
And just because of the rules of the government, my children didn't choose for this. They cannot be blamed for things that we have been chosen for, or stupid ideas from the government. All the future of our children will be gone. I think the reason why they are doing this is that there are a lot of, green organizations that want to have in this region only industry and nature. There is no place for agriculture in this region in their mind. They also call it agro-bashing. That's something that's going on for years for now, especially in this region. I don't know why, because actually the agriculture in this region is at top of the world, but still all the media, all the newspaper, often influenced by people who work there with green and nature motivations, continue to push and punish and write wrong things about agriculture. Instead of giving them a future, I'm afraid, really afraid, that we are going to leave them a lot of debt, and they don't have any future left.
join us for some wine.
Please, a photo, just, and after with the audience. Now you come just here, this. It's not the selfie, but it's a video. Please, everybody, hello, for a photo. Now it's the video. Thank you. I want to better for Was it bad? No.
Shows me I had a few times that he didn't wake up. He didn't wake up.
I know, this cold is going around. I was very sick.